So our next panelist is Ephrat Levy-Lehad, who I'm sure is known to many of you. She's one of the leaders in the development of gene testing for BRCA1 and other genetic risks for breast cancer from Israel. There you go.
So first, I'd like to thank each and every one of you, because the BCRF is really what makes all of our research possible. You've heard about access to care. We have access to care, but we suffer from access to research funding, and this is where the BCRF makes a huge difference. And the work that we do that is supported by BCRF regards two populations. One is a collaboration with Dr. Moeen Kanan, who's here in the audience, from Bethlehem University, and Mary Claire King from the University of Washington, looking at breast cancer genetics in the Palestinian population, and I'll talk about that a little more in the end. And the other is a project also in collaboration with Mary Claire King, looking at the Ashkenazi Jewish population. And I think this is really an example where you can do something in a different country that immediately impacts what happens to breast cancer prevention in the United States and in other countries. And what we're really interested in is looking at the genetic advances and seeing how do we translate that into better prevention for women. We're all in the midst of this genetic revolution. There's a genetic test for everything, supposedly. How do you use that? And what we were thinking is that even though BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutations were first identified in families where you have multiple cases of breast and ovarian cancer, and I'm sure this is familiar even personally to many of you, the question was, can we use this for the whole population? And there was a scientific question to be answered first, and that is, what if you just identify carriers at the population level? So if you have a family history of cancer, obviously you're thinking of the possibility that this might be genetic. But what if you don't have any family history? Could you still be at genetic risk? And that was really the question that we're asking with a study that's about to be finished with the BCRF. And what we did was we decided to identify carriers not because they had cancer or their family members had cancer, but just through the general population. And I know that you would think that in New York it's also easy to find a general Ashkenazi Jewish population, but obviously in Israel this is even easier. So we approached 8,000 men and basically tested them, and those who were found to be carriers, we then went out to their female relatives and looked to see whether in fact they were at a high risk for cancer. And we're now summarizing our results, but I would say that we're moving in the direction where we see that there's a high risk for cancer even in these women who were just identified in the general population. About half of them had no family history of cancer, would never have gone for testing. And this brings us to the question of whether, in fact, this should be offered to Ashkenazi Jewish women. Now, the idea here, and it's important to emphasize, it's not just Ashkenazi Jewish women. We're doing Ashkenazi Jewish women now because they're easy to test. There are just 3 specific mutations in Ashkenazi Jewish women that explain almost all of the spectrum of mutations in Ashkenazi Jews. But as we advance in our genetic technology, and I was just at the American Society of Human Genetics meeting, and we're really moving into a situation where sequencing is going to be possible. Sequencing is looking at every single base pair, every single bead in that chain of your genetic material in your DNA, and that's becoming possible. And what the results of our study will mean is, okay, right now maybe you can test women who only have a specific range of mutations, but very soon we'll be able to test every woman for an entire spectrum of mutations. And of course, this also, in terms of prevention, I think it's really a revolution. It'll also impact not only breast cancer, but probably other diseases, but there's still many questions to be answered. For example, will women be interested? And Evelyn said earlier that knowledge is power, but knowledge is also related to fear for some individuals, and there's always going to be questions of how to best apply that, how to make it most useful to women, and these are the kinds of questions we're interested in asking. And I think the importance is to realize how applicable this will be everywhere, even though right now it's being done in Israel. In the Palestinian project, we're looking more to reach that point where we know what's going on in that specific population. One of the things we're all interested in, yesterday we had our scientific symposium, and in the genetics session, what we were all talking about is we have BRCA1, BRCA2. Where are BRCA3, 4, 5, 6, up to N? And I think that right now, the new genetic technology that we have where we can look at your entire genetic makeup suddenly make that possible, and that's where populations that have not been studied yet, such as the Palestinian population, can be very important in helping us identify new genes for breast cancer. And this is done vis-a-vis while setting up a program that enables access in genetic services where it was previously not available. And I really want to thank all of you for making that possible.